Hey, welcome to Empowered Astrology. I'm Christopher Mitchell, and I'm here with Tom Jacobs. And this is our first episode where we're here to kind of introduce the show and talk a little bit about how it came together. So I'm going to pass it off to Tom to start and invite you to share your take on this. Like, what are we doing here and how did this happen?
What are we doing here? How did this happen? So I have some people off and on over the years since I've written and channeled a number of books. People have asked me, where is your astrology basics book, where you introduce concepts and describe planets, houses, signs, etc. And I've always been hesitant to do that because, and I haven't done it, because I always refer people to Steve Forrest's books because I do kind of niche stuff at a very high level, which he does too, but he does have the basics teachings available. And I don't know, my Uranus in the first, maybe I just didn't want to slow down enough to think in a way that was about basics. Like for me, I had before wanted people to learn basics. Learn it wherever you can learn it, whatever. Do all your studies and then come to me and I'll teach you how to do a very high level of Aquarian Age astrology with the multi-life journey. And so I always kind of put it off. And in some of the tutoring that you have done with me, it turns into it has many times, because we're both former students of philosophy, it's turned into these dialogues and discussions. And there's just a chemistry whereby you, Chris, ask a question. And I realize there's something in the background that should be explained, like a very philosophical approach to it. And in some of those things, we just started talking about, I wanted to do another podcast, another thing on a regular basis, but maybe doing it alone wasn't the right thing for me, just for various reasons. And I didn't want to generate the stories of the basics. And you said something like, I was thinking of the people, but you said something like, well, what if we do it together and I'll ask you questions? And I was like, oh, that's perfect. Whatever it was, because I don't want to sit here and go on and on about it, but in dialogue, I'd love to. Mm-hmm. So that kind of idea came up, and then the idea of you kind of being a host and kind of me, whatever. And then I said, yeah, well, your voice will be welcome too, and we'll do it together. But maybe you can structure it since whatever. But that's where it came from, the desire to get some of these thoughts out. Also have a collaboration, but also have a forum where, at least for a while, it's not about current events and larger mundane worldly things or all the individual stuff that I do with individual clients, but about teaching the basics. And so it seems like a great forum to essentially start from scratch, maybe not an exhaustive educational system on everything astrology, but really grounded and rooted in a kind of approach that I find helps people a lot. Mm-hmm. Coming into a new age, transitioning out of the Piscean age, and the kind of thought patterns that are very prevalent in modern astrology, that I'm like, oh, I'd love to offer, there's a little tweak on that in case it's helpful. And it turns out to be quite helpful. So this is the beginning of our garden, so to speak. I think of it that way.
For my part, it was like, and for those who are already familiar with astrology, I have my Venus conjunct Tom's, Moon and Mercury, right?
Moon, Mercury, Neptune. Yes.
Moon, when Neptune. I found Moon, Mercury, Neptune, right? And we're both Mercury, Neptune people, and there's some other kind of overlaps too. And when I found Tom's stuff, for me, I've told this story to people, that it was like, I was, and I'm very Uranian as well, so I was like, self-taught, like just kind of digesting from lots of different pieces across the net and different books. I did resonate with Stephen Forrest's stuff. I tuned into some other teachers as well. But when I found the way that Tom describes astrology, it felt like things started to cohese and accelerate in my understanding. And just for me, it was, it's been a reflection that's helped me to kind of, focus it all together and start to make sense of it in deeper ways and use it more effectively. So Tom's been a really great teacher for me in that regard around astrology. And I kind of couldn't get enough of it. I still can't, to be honest. And I'm like always eager to have these conversations and explore these astrological ideas with him. And so, the offer of taking that tutoring and getting it for free all the time to explore all the questions I have, and then also creating cool, helpful content and like exploring growth through that was, is fabulous. And there was actually two different conversations that were happening. There was the basics thing was its own idea where, I kind of picked at that sometimes and prompted him a little bit about where's this set of foundational teachings to, because I like your take on Pluto. I like your take on Chiron. I want to hear as well the, this same kind of breakdown for the signs, the houses, and the planets to have that way of thinking about them. To also get that reference point for those ways of for your way of thinking about those things too. And I like to joke with you that it could be an advanced basics course or something like that.
Right.
And then at points in our conversation, it started to feel exciting that I could be helpful in that process in drawing it out. And then I think there was also this other thing of like, and also it might be exciting to have a podcast at some point where we explore just all these other loose threads of possibility, from an episode about the age of Aquarius to an episode about this public figure's birth chart to an episode about this misconception about the nodes, and just to be able to go all the different places we want to go. And I think now it's arrived at this form where we are launching this Empowered Astrology podcast to talk about astrology in empowered ways, right? And to get kind of to tune into it in the way that we like to tune into it. And we're going to start that off by doing a run of episodes covering those foundational basics, and then launch off from there into wherever else we want to go. So we're starting here with the foundations so that it'll be available to anyone who might want to explore those episodes. And then we're going to start kind of just roaming wherever our curiosity takes us.
And having the starting place of like I said, we both come from philosophy student backgrounds, and so to say something when you're in philosophy class or philosophy world, somebody's always going to ask you to define a term to make sure that you're using the words the same ways, like as they are. Let me understand where you're coming from when you say perception or whatever it is. And so that's all the time, and that's kind of where some of this came from. So I'm really excited. I'm excited about that, and we are both Uranian. And so, when I say, oh, but you could look at it this way, you say, oh, I can look at it that way. And then things open up in dialogue. So that's exciting to because I won't write a basics book. I don't think I ever will. Maybe we can transcribe this later and we can talk about it, but it's not an exhaustive, ground up from the ground up. But there are so many conceptions of certain things in astrology which come from that I would love to offer more or different views of. And sometimes, and I just want to set this intention, for everybody listening, as Uranian people are often contrarian people. And they'll be presented with something, and then because they need to be different, need to individuate. They have original views. We have original views. And so all the time I probably seem like I'm poo-pooing everything in astrology, and I want to make sure that I say at the outset here, that's not my intention. I'm looking always for the most helpful explanation. And then I'm always thinking later, was that the most helpful? And how can I evolve that explanation? Or how can I understand? Because when we're learning astrology, and this is really important if you're a beginner, your brain will latch onto certain shortcut terms, which may eventually limit you. One of my big things is Saturn. If you hear Saturn and you think, ugh, I want to change your mind. So that's actually where the title Empowered Astrology comes from. Because everything that I think about and do and teach, and everything Chris and I talk about astrology, I'm always thinking and pushing and pulling, how can we see this as an opportunity for empowerment? So anyway, that's where I come from as a contrarian, but I'm trying not to just poo-poo things. I'm trying to add to explanations or deepen and enrich things so you can use astrology to live. Because it's not about, for me, it's not about knowledge is power. Or I like how smart I feel when I talk about astrology. That's not it. I Pluto and Libra in the 12th, and I'm like trying to figure out how to help people. So there's this like constant churning of how to understand things in a different way in case it's helpful to explain it in a different way or to add multiple perspectives. Anyway, that's where the title comes from. Mm-hmm. It wasn't hard to come up with. We had a couple versions, and then that one kind of shined through. Because it's super important. I know to me, and I think to you, Chris, that we don't feel pigeonholed by an explanation of an archetype. Or, oh, you're a Capricorn. Oh, you're a Scorpio. That we don't feel disempowered because of stereotypes. So anyway, that's a huge part of what we're bringing in. You can add to that or correct me, but I think that's a huge part of what each of us brings in is the desire to kind of elevate a level of dialogue. And we both happen to have that philosopher inside where we're kind of seeking certain kinds of clarity, certain kinds of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's two things that want to come through me about that. That the first is there's another layer here to how this came together, and it's I recognized in myself as I was grappling with astrological concepts and watching transits and thinking about my chart and thinking about astrology, these kinds of pitfalls of the mind, and I would often come to Tom to
Yes.
help untangle them, like disempowering ideas or the utilization of astrology against the self instead of the self. But like noticing how my mind would get stuck on astrological ideas, and wanting to find more empowered ways to think about these kinds of things, to become free of those kinds of limited or lower octave interpretation trappings, and to be able to see this more from an empowered and clear and neutral point of view to better work with it for my evolution, to better work with it in clear understanding of the energy that's actually unfolding, rather than just like kind of some of my half-formed ideas about what energy might be unfolding. And I think we can do that a lot with Mercury retrogrades and Saturn transits and Pluto transits and these kinds of things, or old classic terminologies in astrology like benefics and malefics and detriments and just talking about things in almost this we can get into this place of good and bad and not see how it's all part of an evolutionary purpose towards consciousness. And so that's also part of what we're doing here, is painting things in those terms. And there's nothing against traditional astrology or classic Hellenistic techniques, Vedic techniques, or all the different worlds and pools of astrological ideation that there are to tune into and benefit from. But when you come and tune into us, we're putting it out in our particular flavor that makes sense to us. And if that's helpful and resonant for you, like you might learn along with us too and enjoy the ways that we're playing with these ideas.
Yeah. One of the conversations that stood out to me as a moment when I think you maybe had mentioned weeks prior or months prior to this moment, you had said something like, well, maybe we could do something together, like a podcast together. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. But then this one particular tutoring session, you said something, you asked me about basically from the ground up, how can I understand the Pluto in Sagittarius generation?
Mm-hmm.
And you asked that question, and I started, and I kept going, and then I kept going, and then I realized, whoa, this is a lot on this, not obscure, but kind of like this thing that we wouldn't give tons of attention to normally, except in my world, Pluto's important for different reasons as an evolutionary astrologer. And I think I asked her a couple times, is this too much? Do you need to change? Am I going to? And you're like, no. What about this aspect of it? And it was, I want to say it was like 30 or 40 minutes of just going into saying, this is what these people experience in many lives. This is why belief is such an issue. This is why optimism and pessimism are such big things they struggle with. And it was just like just deep, 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 deep. And I was like, yeah, this is how I want to work. And so I was really, really inspired by how a bunch of those calls became what I think the podcast will be. We've already recorded 4 episodes, and I think it already is. How there's space to explore in really rich ways that may not cover every mundane detail of like how Neptune manifests in the world, but talking about all the different ways within a person Neptune functions. It's so valuable for the depth, so our brains don't get stuck on keywords and stuck on stereotypes. Yeah. Anyway, but I just remember that one conversation that was like the best ever. And so now we're doing the podcast, and I'm eager, happily to recreate that. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, I remember that one too. And that was, I think I set aside my, I had all these other ideas and questions for that day that I kind of shelved because the conversation that ended up happening was so engaging and so illuminating and interesting that it's just letting it take that space. And then again, just wonderful to be hanging out here recording episode after episode of like continuously unpacking more and more and more. I have a list of maybe 40 potential episode places we can go, like already like formatted in my OneNote, and I don't know if my lists will ever end, but it'll be kind of joyous to continually explore what comes out of them.
Great. Good to hear. I didn't know that. I didn't know you had a real list, but I think last time we talked about it, there were maybe 15 or 18 things on it. Like months ago, you emailed me a draft, and I was like, yeah, awesome. And then, so good. I want to get into just a little bit about energy.
Yeah.
Astrology as kind of a language to talk about energy, just as an intro basics idea. Specifically in that the sun shines light, a planet, so to speak, reflects light to the earth energetically, and we're imprinted in these certain ways. But if we think about that, it's all about energy. And that's where I want to tie this in with the empowered astrology idea, where every single thing can be looked at, every detail. A square between these two planets, or or a planet in that house, or this planet retrograde. Every single detail can be understood in terms of energies that you can use and therefore use in various ways. So the empowered astrology idea is to understand, and this is kind of where I just want to make sure it's part of our launching part, to understand that we can make choices about these things in our charts, and as life asks us questions and we develop over time, but we can use the energies in our charts in various ways. We're not destined for some unhappy thing because I have Pluto in the 12th, or my Saturn's retrograde, or I have Venus square the nodes, or whatever, or that I'm a Scorpio. Just kind of thinking about stereotypes and, ugh, that guy's a Scorpio, stay away from him. Whatever stereotypes we learn. So everything about our conversations will be about how to use energy and how we might default behave in a certain way because we don't yet have new ideas, but how this archetype, this planet, that sign how we can make choices that are empowering, that leave us empowered. And so for me, that's part of the mission statement launching part of this. I want to tie that in. It's about energy, like the sun and the light to Pluto, it reflects, we're imprinted. But we have these archetypal ranges or ranges of possible expression. Curmudgeon, let's say Saturn for a second. Curmudgeon, judge, critic, harsh authoritarian, rigid person, not open to change, whatever. But also mentor, coach, guide, helper, supporter. Like there's positives and negatives with everything, and when we start to see what choices we have, we can empower ourselves. And that's for me. I just want to make sure I got that in this first episode.
Yeah. I think you're giving me a place to go here, where as we wrap on the intro, and then we'll the next episode we're going to start setting up the framework for our basics series, and I think we've danced around it a little bit around what our view on astrology is and why it's important to come at it in an empowered way. But I think, focusing up here and talking about what we mean by empowerment and how we can use astrology in a way that also has consciousness and free will as part of the conversation.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're getting at there, is that all of these archetypes archetypes are these like infinity boxes that so much can come out of, and it's with the way that we engage with these energies informs I'm feeling a little on a limb here, but like informs our relationship to them. Do you want to talk a little bit about what I'm reaching for here?
I think you're getting at like one way to think about it is our beliefs can limit us because of what we believe is happening or what we expect to be happening. So if we get stuck with keywords, we may not be empowered. Like, my Saturn's retrograde, so I have all these problems, blah blah blah, or lots of other things. Or I was born with Mercury retrograde. Some people, right? Some people are, and they hear terrible things, and they expect to have trouble because they have Mars square Saturn in their chart or Sun opposite, whatever. Our beliefs, if we're willing to give life a chance, we can find out what's possible. And we have, like you say, these infinity boxes. It was actually, when you said that, I thought like black boxes where you can't see what's happening on the inside because there's infinity inside it. The infinite ways to express Saturn. We look at it, it's a little box that says Saturn on it. Mm-hmm. But every possible expression of Saturn is available to us. So we can either feel pigeonholed and limited, or by default expect the worst if we've been exposed to astrology as a doomsday tool, or if we've had negative predictions, shared with us or something, or if we have a defeatist feeling about life, or if we're exhausted and burned out or whatever. And so I probably am taking it in a different direction a little bit than what you meant. Maybe you can jump in, but what we can do with astrology, it's important to always be aware of our self-imposed or self-conceived limitations given certain things, like, my Saturn's in detriment or something. It's like, does that mean you're doomed? Does that mean you're going to be unhappy? Or how can you take every detail and work with it in some conscious, proactive way? Not head in the clouds, Pollyanna stuff, or new age smoke blown in some direction or other, but the sense of, okay, that's the disposition of your Saturn. What are you going to do with it to improve your life, or to be happy, healthy, or fulfilled, or to be creative, to feel like you're on a path, like your life is meaningful? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to use each energy? And go ahead.
Yeah, it's not about bypassing or glossing over any of the ways that we can work with and read and understand astrology. This isn't about turning Saturn into Jupiter and but it's about like understanding okay, so something's coming in, something's changing, something's happening. There's an energy unfolding in our evolution, individually or collectively, or we have a particular imprint. We're wired a particular way. And how can we see that in an empowering, like consciousness-based way where it's not just a bad hand, or it's not just happening to us, but it's something that we're here to work with, we can work with, that we can make something positive out of, and that's happening for us. Yeah. And so I think that's just what we mean when we talk about empowered astrology, is that orientation to the unfolding energies of life and to the soul blueprint that each of us carry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. When I, a couple of years ago, recorded a transits MP3 course, I kept finding myself doing something I didn't expect to do, and I realized it was actually necessary. Like, what does it mean when Jupiter transits your blah, blah, blah? I realized, and I kept finding myself saying, it depends on how the chart holder chooses to use the energy being transited. Like Uranus, or like transiting Jupiter square one's Uranus. Well, what does that look like? Well, it all depends on how the person experiences Uranus and how the person believes about Jupiter teachings, or what Jupiter is possible to do. So it's all this stuff about your perspective and your belief. And so, we're inviting everyone watching to be open to some new perspectives, to see that you can become empowered through astrology. And like you said bat, being dealt a bad hand. That's a great image to, because when I started really diving into astrology, I'd go to meetup groups and different groups, and people would bring their charts and chat over coffee, and people will say stuff like, they'll share their chart on paper, and they'll say, oh, look at that, and that's because I have this terrible thing in my chart, so I'm never going to be happy in work or relationships. And I was always like, oh, I don't like to hear that, because I got into astrology to try to figure out, frankly, how to not slip into depressiveness, which I'd had most of my life. And some people might say, oh, I don't know that about you, or I wouldn't see that. But I was like, the same reason why I majored in philosophy. I want to know how to live. Are there tools in here to help me be okay with being alive? Like other tools. And that's this whole thing about becoming empowered, no matter what hand you're dealt, no matter what hand you find yourself looking at. That's been, that's the empowerment path for me. And it's not blowing smoke or Pollyanna garbage. It's actually change your mind, change your behavior, understand with compassion why you would do the thing that's harmful, and you can make a new choice. You can step forward. So there's a lot of compassion acceptance, which requires a humility, steering away from humiliation. Like if we're doing something, and it's a lot of stuff about that's the foundation of these combos.
And the cool thing about astrology and like the complexity possible in it, and it's there's a thing here where it's simple and it's complex, but there's so many different arrays of energetic possibility.
Yes,
it's not just any one thing, that we all have our own makeup and imprint and unfolding transits and progressions, and every journey is different, but they can all be oriented to with positivity and with consciousness, and it's not to make something that feels challenging not feel challenging, but it's to say in this like soul-based or consciousness-based perspective, free will kind of way, that whatever's going on in all of our lives is somehow for us, and that we can understand and work with it. So I feel like that kind of gets at it. That's what we're going to be up to here. And we'll, I think, wrap up here for today and pick up on the details of this all moving forwards. I want to say that if you vibe with what we're doing and you want to explore more, we're also launching a Patreon account, and you can find us there. We'll put links in the descriptions and show notes and stuff, and there's going to be some content on there. So I think we're starting off with a list of major transits for 2023 or a video about the major transits of 2023.
Yes.
And we'll probably be doing a monthly forecast to start out, and we'll see how else that evolves as well. So if you want to tune in more, feel free to check that out and see if it's a match for you. And if you made it this far, thank you for listening and tuning in and exploring with us. And I know that me and Tom are both excited to take this journey.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Have a good one, everyone.